Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka NBT, and I'm at the in-laws this weekend, so you are viewing a very low-tech approach to filmmaking. The camera I'm using is the internal camera on a laptop I picked up a couple of days ago. I did drag my microphone here with me, and if you listen very closely, you can hear the laptop speakers trying to run OBS. Oh, a beautiful sound, paired delicately with the borders from my 2017 videos. Since we are steeped in the nostalgia of 2017, I thought it would be fun to look at a deck from 2017, Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys. This was the first Duel Links deck that really spoke to me and got me interested in this specific game. Duel Links before this was kind of the way you conceive of GOAT format, mostly amalgamations of good stuff. Even the standouts, things like Harpy's Hunting Ground Relinquished, were just two good things smashed together. This was the first sort of cohesive, linear, archetypal deck. One of the very first attempts at replicating what we play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! In Duel Links, and I could not have been more excited grinding for these chickens in 2017. So I figure, let's take a look at the list and see if it holds up against what 2020 has to offer. Like all Duel Links decks, it starts with a skill. Now, the skill we've selected is Beatdown. I haven't selected Beatdown because it's particularly good. Rather, I've selected Beatdown because that's what the deck played back in the day. It occasionally was a little too bricky and as a result played something like Restart, but Restart's been nerfed about 15 times since then, so Beatdown seems the closest to what it actually was at the time. This skill, until the end of the turn, increases the attack of all face-up level 5 or higher monsters you control by the number of level 5 or higher monsters you control times 300. Now, it can only be used once per duel. I believe that's been changed. Back in the day, I think you could use it every turn. Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys, unfortunately, caps out at 2400, which is very, very low. Even by old Duel Links standards, you had to get over stuff, and Beatdown was the way you would do it. Let's do the card by card. It starts, of course, with 3 Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys, one of my favorite cards of all time. During your next standby phase, after this card is destroyed by a card effect, not necessarily your opponent's, and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon it from the graveyard and Heavy Storm. It's such a powerful effect stapled to such a big body that begs to be broken. Next, we're playing the card that priced most people out of optimal builds of this deck, 3 copies of Sphere Karibo. Now, there were no deals back then. You had to grind for this sucker. Sphere Karibo is an incredibly powerful card, of course, but it's made all the more powerful because this deck really doesn't have a lot of ways to set back row. I've said it before and I'll say it again about Duel Links, back row is king, and Sphere Karibo is a way to have back row while not feeling the downside of Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys. After that is 1 copy of Goka the Pyre of Malice. You may not be familiar with this card at all. If you control a fire monster, you can special this from your hand, then target a fire monster you control and destroy it. During your standby phase, it summons a token, but it's never living that long anyway. What it's important for is proccing cards like Yaksha, our next card, on your first turn. Fire King Avatar Yaksha does 2 really important things. First, it's a target so you can actually activate the real powerhouse of the deck, Fire King Island, and secondly, it is a monster. Mostly you're just setting this card face down, but often his 1800 attack stat was enough to get in for lethal against opponents playing less than optimal builds. We're also playing 2 Planet Pathfinder because Fire King Island is so integral to the deck, we absolutely must be finding it. At the time, we were playing 3 enemy controller. Now, of course, this card's been semi-limited. This card isn't fantastic. Sacred Phoenix does destroy it if it comes back during your standby phase, but games were longer. Usually an opponent would actually end on a monster and then not OTK you. You could do some extremely cheeky things where your Sacred Phoenix comes back, you can fire off the enemy controller in response to the effect activation that will destroy the Fire King Island but not wipe your monsters, instead wiping the one that you stole from your opponent, or use it for OTKs. It was just a very powerful, flexible card, and nothing came close for many, many sets. Finally, the hallmark of the deck, we've got 3 Fire King Island. This is a card from, I think, 2017, printed in a format where cards existed and were good from 2006. If this card is sent from the field zone to the graveyard or banished, you get to destroy all the monsters you control, and you can only activate one of these 2 effects once per turn. During your main, you can destroy a monster in your hand or one you control to search a Fire King, or if you control no monsters, you can special summon a Fire-Winged Beast type monster from your hand. Now, both of these effects came up. You can special a Sacred Phoenix and just assume that a 24-27 with beatdown attack monster was enough to win the game on its own, or you could set up for recursive loops by popping a Sacred Phoenix, it comes back, destroys Fire King, pops Sacred Phoenix, it comes back. You get at least 2 heavy storms over the course of the game, provided you're not being OTK'd. That's what made cards like Sphere Karibo so integral. And finally, Card of the Soul. This is a searcher for Sacred Phoenix exactly. You look at your deck and add 1 monster from your deck to your hand whose attack and defense equals your life points. Now in Duel Links, this is usually 4,000, and as a result, it's able to search the 2,400 attack and 1,600 defense Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys. However, during an especially aggro format, they upped the life points to 5,000 for a couple of weeks, and this deck was just unplayable. So let's see how it fares against what today has in store. Our match is up against Odeon, and this was a fantastic thing to see in 2017. If your opponent was on Odeon, you could be sure they were going to set trap cards, which is exactly where we wanted to be on Sacred Phoenix. We'll draw 4 cards off the top of our deck, and they are just about as good as they possibly could be. Hands did not get much better than this back in the day. We're going first. We're going to lead with a copy of Card of the Soul. Now recall that Sacred Phoenix's attack and defense stat means that that's going to add a second copy to our hand. With any luck, we should be able to chew through 2 Sacred Phoenixes on our very first turn. We'll get a copy of Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys and then set this Fire King Island. Now the trouble with Fire King Island is when it destroys all of your monsters, you are defenseless for a turn, and many decks, especially in 2020, can capitalize upon that. You can beat back this dilemma by doing 2 Sacred Phoenixes. If they both find their way into the graveyard, one will come back, destroy Fire King Island and the remainder of your monsters, then the other will resolve. By using Goka's effect in order to destroy the Yaksha that we searched off Fire King Island, we can destroy the second Sacred Phoenix and dare our opponent to OTK through a 2,200 attack point monster or face dueling heavy storms. Our opponent's going to lead with an A-lister the Invoker. This is the point that I realize the game is already lost. Back in the day, there was no way to banish cards, at least none that were remotely competitive. Now we've got Karma Cut, DD Crow, and unfortunately for me, Invocation. By banishing one of my 2 Sacred Phoenix of Nephthyses, they're not only going to have the material to make Invoked Purgatrio, they're also going to put me off of any sort of clock. Next turn, the best we can hope to accomplish is destroying our own Fire King Island and getting a Sacred Phoenix back on the following turn. But really, recursive cards like A-lister the Invoker were such a turning point that I don't think we're going to be able to beat it back. They're going to attack in with Purgatrio, and thank goodness they haven't figured out a way to OTK. It's got to be something incredible off the top, and unfortunately for us, it's just another copy of Yaksha. One of the downsides to playing an extremely consistent deck like this is it wasn't particularly adaptable. Your deck was built to do one thing: recur Sacred Phoenix in exactly this scenario. When it was forced to stare down anything that interacted with that game plan, it was usually out of luck. Fire King Island will destroy our Sacred Phoenix, and we'll normal summon the Yaksha just not to die. We do get to destroy our opponent's Floodgate Trap Hole, but that unfortunately brings me to the next major weakness of this strategy. Trap cards have become much better. This is an activated ability, the Heavy Storm we're talking about, and if our opponent has in the back row, say, a Fiendish Chain, a Karma Cut, or even a Floodgate Trap Hole in a scenario where our copy of Sacred Phoenix isn't immediately threatened, it really doesn't matter that we're able to recur it every turn. Their traps simply aren't destructive. They're going to go for another copy of Invocation, and down goes our second copy of Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys. This means our opponent is going to have dueling Purgatrios on their side of the field, and provided they don't absolutely screw up the math, they should have game. By activating the graveyard effect of Invocation and putting A-lister back in the hand, they can proceed to battle phase, get over the first copy of Yaksha for just a little bit of damage, and then attack directly with Purgatrio, boosting for 1,000 in the damage step by sending this A-lister from their hand to the graveyard. They'll do just that, and unfortunately, we are reminded about the inexorable passage of time. So that's Sacred Phoenix. Believe it or not, this deck was once a power player, a fearsome foe to find on ladder, now reduced to this. For what it's worth, I've tried to update this deck a whole bunch of times. New Fire Kings have come out, for example, to make the deck much more powerful, consistent, and adaptable. But the thesis of the deck is the problem, not the individual cards. Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys is just not a viable win con. Its attack is too low, its recursion is too slow in the face of a Fire King Island, and the traps it is hoping to destroy trade very profitably with it. It's just a monster whose time has come and gone, but I will never forget the joy that I felt pulling my third mini box UR in 2017.